Hello everyone and welcome to another really awesome game from the first round of the FTX Crypto Cup. It is Anish Giri versus Magnus Carlsen, and this is the third game of their match. First two games ended in a draw, and this one features none other than the French defense. In the first game where Magnus had the black pieces, Magnus played the g6, he went for an offbeat opening, but now as the first two games ended in a draw, he decided to take things seriously and decided to challenge Anish to a very, very deadly line of the French defense. But who better to test it against than the great theoretician such as Anish Giri. So let's dive straight into it, as there is quite a lot to enjoy in this game. We have e4, e6 going for the French defense, d4, d5, not knight to c3. We've had so many knight to c3s that I thought it was played in this game as well, but rather e5. Anish goes for the advanced variation, not some sort of a crazy Winver variation. We have c5, c3, and now knight to c6. We have knight to f3 and now bishop to d7 by Magnus. Here queen to b6 is still the most popular move, just putting pressure on d4, also putting pressure on b2, but first bishop to d7, bishop to e2, and now knight g to e7. And this is especially useful since Anish already played bishop to e2, so you don't have bishop on d3 controlling f5 and g6, and the knight on f5 will be a monster, putting more pressure on d4. This knight attacks d4, you're gonna play queen b6, put more pressure on d4, and if Anish ever wants to get rid of this knight from f5, he will have to play g4, and then the game really opens up nicely. So Anish castles, and now we have c captures on d4. Again, this is by far more popular, but Magnus first goes for the trade. C captures, we have c captures, and only now knight to f5. Knight to c3, and now rook to c8. We have king to h1, a nice prophylactic move by Anish. It's hard to say if it's necessary in this position, but I mean, it's always a good idea. The queen and bishop, when the position opens up, you don't want your king on a dark square here. So here a6 by Magnus, not allowing knight to b5, and now we have bishop to g5. Again, there is one game where g4 was played, just eliminating this knight from f5, but Anish plays bishop to g5, and it is now, as of move 11, that we have a completely new game. So how will Magnus continue here? He goes queen b6. This is where the queen belongs, and now that the dark square bishop has been developed, the queen comes into the game with tempo, attacking the b2 pawn. Also, this pawn is attacked 3 times, so what can Anish play? You could play bishop to e3, go for some sort of a queen captures on b2, sort of maybe a poison pawn variation, but not really. But instead, Anish goes for knight to a4 right away. This prevents black from start capturing on d4 as the queen is hanging, and also the knight on a4 nicely defends the b2 pawn. So queen back to a7 looks like a weird square for the queen, but you've seen in many openings that the queen can actually have a very, very comfortable game tucked away on a7 like this, like in some lines of the Scandinavian that we've shown. So bishop back to e3, defending d4, and now Magnus could eliminate the bishop right away and claim the bishop pair, but for the moment this knight is much stronger than this bishop, and there's no reason to rush this. So bishop to e7, continuing development, and now pawn to a3. We have pawn to b5, chasing the knight back, knight to c3, and only now Magnus castles kingside, and now bishop to d3, saying that an attack is definitely coming, with white having control over g5. Maybe g4 can be played at some point, opening up the position. The queen can come maybe to h5. So if you allow Anish one good move, or rather, if you play a bad one, things might go wrong. Things might go very wrong for you. So knight captures on e3. Magnus finally eliminates this bishop. F captures, and now pawn to b4, opening up the position. A captures, knight captures, now attacking the light square bishop. And interestingly, Anish doesn't tuck the bishop away. Bishop to b1 does seem like an automatic here, but he decides against it. He plays pawn to e4, he opens up the position, and he allows the elimination of the light square bishop. So Magnus happily captures it, knight captures, queen captures, and now d captures on e4. Knight captures on e4, so what has Anish gained by giving up both of his bishops? Well, his knights are very, very active now. The knights can come to g5, also some sacrificing with knight to f6 is possible, and you have to be very, very careful here. For example, yes, your a6 pawn is also hanging, but let's say you play pawn to a5, it seems like a good idea. Already knight to g5, and you will have a very, very hard time defending this. It's Probably it's lost for black, but maybe, you know, with some miraculous play you can save this. Point being that, let's say play something like h6, just knight f6 check, and it's game over. Once the knight is captured, the other knight also covers h7, the bishop captures or g captures, this will be checkmate. So you can defend, but you have to play g6, weaken your position even further, and then you're going to have a really bad game. So instead, after knight captures on e4, Magnus takes away the g5 square from the knights. He wastes a move with h6. Point being that for the moment, his a6 pawn is defended with a tactic. If rook captures on a6, queen b8 is beautiful. Puts pressure on b2, but really what you are doing is preparing bishop to b5. With the queen on d3 and rook on f1, this is terrible for white. So Anish spots this, he plays rook f to e1, gets one of the rooks away from this diagonal, and now pawn to a5. Now this is very much playable. We have queen to d2 by Anish, again putting pressure on the a5 pawn, but now Magnus plays bishop to c6. Here Anish probably is even baiting Magnus a little bit to play bishop to b4, kind of seems like a good idea, but then queen captures on b4, and of course Magnus can resign. If a captures, rook captures on a7, you're down a full piece, this is resigns. So after queen to d2, bishop to c6, the bishop finally assumes this spectacular diagonal, and now comes queen to f4. Anish has to build up the attack, because the immediate knight to f6 check, although you really want to play this, still doesn't work. Magnus will just move the king, and you know, it's worth exploring. For example, queen d3, you threaten checkmate, you kind of force the capture on g6. Now you play queen back to d2, attack the pawn here. Now king h7, and if d3 check, f5, black defense, and there's no actual attack happening here. So instead, bishop c6, Anish improves his position, queen to f4, now queen to b8, just putting pressure on the b2 pawn, hoping to create a passer. And of course, if rook captures, we again have bishop to b4, because the rooks are now on dark squares. As you can see, rooks really don't go along very well with your opponent's bishops. So rook e2, defending the b2 pawn, also putting a rook on a light square, and now pawn to a4. Now the bishop nicely defends the pawn here, queen to g4. Now knight to f6 might be a bit more potent, but Magnus says not really. Just queen b5 goes after the rook here, and now rook f2 does seem to be the way to go for Anish, but he plays rook a to e1, and he misses. Well, he doesn't miss. I think he's actually baiting bishop to b4 to go for the attack, thinking that maybe it works, maybe Magnus will not have time to calculate, or maybe Magnus will just be afraid. Who knows? I mean, once you don't really have all that many options, you have to go for something. So bishop to b4, Magnus is not afraid. He leaves this diagonal, and the bishop on e7 was a monster, guarding f6, guarding g5, but he says it is not a problem. And Anish now has to decide whether to go for knight to f6 check, and it is quite a move. You could also consider knight d6 attacking queen and the rook, kind of forcing bishop captures on d6, creating a pass pawn, but again, it doesn't bring him all that much. The real line to calculate is knight f6 check, king to h8, and now knight to h5, threatening checkmate on g7, rook to g8, and now it seems like black defended, but what about knight to g5? So you even have to take this into consideration. Now threatening knight captures on f7. Luckily, Magnus can capture here, and now after queen to h3, threatening knight to f7, a discovered checkmate, you have this beautiful, the only move that saves the game for Magnus, g4. Now, once the queen leaves this diagonal, you can just start capturing, or if queen to h4, still threatening checkmate, now you have even g5. So at some point you will have to capture. Now we play bishop captures on e1, and there's no good way to play this. Knight f6, okay, you're still threatening something. Queen d3, we are bringing the queen back to help out with the defense. If queen h5 check, king g7, queen g5, there's queen g6, and now you're just down material. Captures, and now of course rook captures on e1, but once you count the pieces, Magnus would be up a whole rook. So it's a good move, but if black defends properly, and chances are Magnus would defend properly, the attack just doesn't work. So Anish prepares it. He plays d5, and it's a standard trick when attacking black's king set, especially in structures like these. If you can gain access to the f5 square with your queen, you will be winning. And here, if Magnus actually captures with the pawn, then knight f6 is winning. You have to move the king. This is the only move, king h8, and now queen f5. You threaten checkmate, and now you force this capture. Once this is captured, you play this captures with check, king h7. Now knight d4, bringing the knight to f5 with tempo, as now the queen is hanging, and there's no good move here. Queen d3, knight f5, we're threatening checkmate, so you either have to give up the queen, or you play rook g8, and now, of course, queen captures on h6 is checkmate. So that's kind of the idea Anish had when playing this d5 move. It's a move that doesn't really do anything unless Magnus captures, e captures on d5, but Magnus, of course, will not do that. He just grabs the rook, bishop captures on e1, knight to d4 attacks the bishop and the queen now, but now just queen to d3. So what do you play? Rook captures on e1, grabbing back the piece. Now bishop captures on d5. We have knight to f6 check, finally, leaving Magnus the only move that is king to h8, and now knight captures on d5, but now queen to d2. A beautiful, beautiful spot by Magnus. The rook is now hanging, so what do you play? Anish plays rook to d1, attacks the queen, but now rook to c1, threatening captures, captures, and checkmate, or the other way around, captures, captures, and checkmate. Anish defends with knight to c3. Now the rook is nicely defended, but I'm sure you guys can pretty much solve this one without even pausing, but just in case, maybe there are new chess players watching, feel free to pause the video and win the game for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on deciding to give up the queen. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is of course queen to e1 check. And as it's checkmate in 2 moves, it was in this position on move 34 that Anish Giri resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Once the queen is accepted, and this is the only move for white, Magnus plays rook, captures on e1, and this is now checkmate. So as you can see, it is definitely questionable whether that king to h1, the prophylactic idea that we discussed, was all that great, but of course the game would take a completely different turn if the king was on g1, and there are many other winning options here for Magnus as well. So yeah, after queen to e1 check, Anish resigned, and Magnus wins the 3rd game, and as Magnus also won the 4th game, it means that Magnus won his match against Anish Giri. So that's basically what happened in their match. First 2 games ended in a draw, and then Magnus won the other 2 games. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, never play the French unless you really excel at it, because you will just crumble. Your position will be unplayable very quickly, even after a few moves. I mean, I dare you, try playing the French online. Go to leeches, go to chess.com, play a 3-minute blitz game, play the French defense. It's not going to be pretty. But if you can play it like Magnus, then of course it is very much playable. So yeah, once again, really hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Peter Rodriguez, Alex Versilio, Francis Air, Ricky Emini, and excellent subscriber for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this spectacular event until it finishes. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And don't worry, I will upload the Chessmaster Grandmaster Edition against Stockfish probably tomorrow morning. See you soon.